All right, everyone, welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 135. I'm the co-host Kyle Anslone, joined by the other co-host Will Porter. Will, how you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Kyle, how you doing?
Pretty good. We got a bunch of stuff to cover, mainly Biden's war on journalists and how that's unfolding with Julian Assange and Tucker Carlson in the crosshairs. Other
Yeah.
stuff too, including our old favorite mercenary Arab Prince. I don't know. We'll figure out if it's a scam or what he had going on, trying to form up a army in Ukraine and I guess make himself the grand wizard of that. So a lot of interesting stuff going on to talk about today, Will. People could share the show at the Libertarian Institute. Libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle has the full archive of the show. The show's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, so that means it's on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed with the Scott Horton Show, Free Man Beyond the Wall, and then Keith Knight's Liberty Weekly, Pat McFarlane, or no, Pat does Liberty Weekly. Keith does
Yeah.
Don't Tread on Anyone. They've both been past guests on the show. You can also find Tommy Solomon's Year Zero on there. So just a ton of great content on that podcast feed. I really recommend people subscribe to that if they're not already subscribed to the Conflicts of Interest feed somewhere. You can support the show on Patreon or Subscribestar. We have the links in the show notes pages anywhere you can find the show. But if you just do, Patreon, Subscribestar, and then Conflicts of Interest, it'll be the first return on Google. So it should be pretty easy to find for everyone. You can also support the show by getting your CBD products at Paloma Verde. The URL is palomaverdecbd.com. And you use the promo code PEACE to get 25% off when you spend $75 or more. Will, I really like the topicals. I use the sports cream most days. It helps with my back pain in the morning. Gotta say, I definitely spend too much time in front of the computer doing what we do, looking up all these, random warmongers, making sure we have all the facts and the details straight, watching the videos from all over the world to try to get a sense of what's really going on, not just going with the Reuters description or whatever, but all that does put some strain on the old back, and so some of the sports cream, rub it on in the morning, and then, by the time it like even wears off, I've already stretched out, done enough throughout the day. I feel better. So it's a great way for me to deal with the back pain. I really recommend that. Will, what do you like?
Yeah, I know you like the salves a lot. I actually have a little sample that I still intend to try pretty soon. I need to do something active to actually, need to use it. But my favorite things at Paloma are the high dose like oil tinctures that you can just that's the biggest dose of CBD you can get. And then also I really like the melatonin soft gels. They have a few different formulations. They have curcumins for like inflammation and stuff. But my thing, I have a hard time sleeping at night, and the melatonin really helps me with insomnia. So if that stuff sounds interesting to you, or if you want to see their, they have educational resources, lab results on their stuff. It's all very official. Visit palomaverdecbd.com and be sure to use the promo code PEACE. I think the first thing we wanted to get into, a first story, is we actually had a couple updates on Julian Assange's case last week. There were a few different things. There was one related to his extradition. There's something that about what might happen to him if he is successfully extradited to the U.S. from the U.K. So I guess start wherever you want there with the updates. Tell us what's happening with Assange and his legal case.
Yeah. Well, when we were talking about Assange's case last week, it seemed good news is kind of a stretch to any time using Assange's case, but it
Right.
looked like there were massive holes poked in the U.S. government's superseding indictment that they're trying to use to get Julian Assange extradited to the U.S. And at that time, Will, there was this kind of in limbo situation where the U.S. had submitted an appeal, but the U.K. High Court hadn't decided to hear it or not. And so I
Right.
really thought there might be a possibility that this may be like the final blow. Like, after you have a massive credibility hit to a main part of your case, maybe at that point you decide to drop the appeal, because at this point the appeal is just over if Julian Assange is likely to kill himself or not in an American prison. I think is kind of the scope of what the U.S. is going after here. And it seems like the Assange team has plenty of room to now file an appeal with the new evidence that's come forward about the
Yeah.
U.S. supersede indictment to challenge the claims that the judge, ruled on. So, if the U.S. were able to overturn with their appeal, then you would think the Assange team would have a right to appeal too, since there's factual inaccuracies that were believed to be true when the judge made her initial ruling. So, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, but we finally found out from the UK High Court what they're going to do with the appeal, and they're going to hear it. I have this article from Consortium News by John Kiriakou titled DOJ Promises Ring Hollow. And he goes into what the DOJ promises were and what's happening here. But maybe to start off, Will, just to go into what the UK High Court granted the appeal on. They don't, it's not like they do the whole case over again. They're just looking at a narrow scope of it. Yeah. And it's not even that they're allowing any contesting on the findings of Julian Assange's mental health, and the judge found that he was somewhere on the autism spectrum and then had a risk of suicide in a U.S. supermax prison because of that. And so what the U.S. is appealing, they're saying that they're willing to guarantee that Assange will not be subject to SAMs. I believe they're special administrative measures. And so This is the fancy way for saying solitary confinement. Or he wouldn't be sent to the supermax ADX prison. That's the one in Florence, Colorado, where some very, very nasty people rot, but also heroes like Ross Ulbricht suffer there. And so, we hope that Julian Assange isn't added to the name of heroes rotting away in that American prison, but that is something that's a risk. And they also offered to transfer Assange to Australia after he's convicted, assuming that he would, I guess, serve out his sentence there. So will this, I guess, in a sense, at least as far as it seeped into the mainstream media, was spun as a victory for the U.S. that, it's now possible to get the ruling that the initial judge made, that was because of Assange's mental health and because of the cruelty of the American justice system, he wouldn't be sent and extradited to the U.S. But even though that decision was made in January, he's been in jail this whole time. They continue to refuse him bail or anything like that, Will. So I think I kind of hit on anything. If I missed anything or confused anything, help me out, Will. What do I need to follow up on? Or I don't know, what you think of this situation.
No, I think you hit on all the main stuff just fine. It does seem like this when they're talking about, he won't be held at ADX Florence, the supermax in Colorado. That is something that we had heard for a long time. It sounds like they're trying to do that in a bid to sort of like address the concern of Assange's mental state. That we won't be putting him in this like terrible dungeon, and so like there's less likelihood he'll commit suicide. So it did sort of seem like, I don't know. Did you think there was like, because you said it was kind of presented as a victory for the U.S. That's kind of how I saw it too, honestly, that this is sort of like them inching their case forward, that it seems like this will be convincing to the U.K. judge based on her previous concerns.
So I guess it depends on what victory means. I think victory for the U.S. means keeping Assange in a jail cell, not necessarily getting themselves closer to extradition. And Ray McGovern wrote a great article on this. We ran it at antiwar.com. You could find it. Ray's been writing a ton of great stuff, like 4 articles in the past week. Everybody should go check out Ray's archive at antiwar.com. But this particular one was absolutely fantastic at explaining how, and I believe this was leaked from like one of the Stratfor documents from WikiLeaks, nothing to do with Sarwalk, but this one in particular outlines a strategy for Julian Assange, which is you don't necessarily have to convict him, because courts point out when you convict Assange, you set up all these terrible legal precedents because he's a journalist. And you're throwing a journalist in jail for doing journalism. That's, a totalitarian fascist system you live in that point. You might as well just have Stalin as your leader. And so I guess one of the things that they see a loophole in that is they could essentially never convict him, but keep him tied up in Western legal systems forever. So for a long time, it was the charges in Sweden, and now it's this. And so who knows,
Right.
maybe they'll stick out another superseding indictment. They'll pursue him for something else. Maybe another Western country will pursue him. I mean, WikiLeaks has produced damning documents not only on the U.S. but the U.K. and other countries, and so I think there's a good reason for Assange to be concerned that would be the strategy here. Another thing I'll point out, Will, is I don't know about the UK justice system. It really confuses me how I think they have like some kind of fluid or paperless constitution system, and
Yeah.
it's kind of just all set up on court precedent and everything like that. But at Consortium News, they have legal experts from the UK on to talk about it on the CN Live show, and then Joe Loria did a pretty good write up on it. That's right
Yeah.
at Consortium News that people could check out, especially if you live in the UK or something. You're actually interested in that angle of it. Now, well, I will say the only part of this that seemed like it may be a little bit of a problem for the U.S. Although, look, my guess is that they're not going to bind themselves to these agreements. Is that there is, I think, a little bit more political interest in Julian Assange in Australia, and that this might not fly in Australia, and so if the U.S. does I guess extradite him back to Australia to serve out the term. I don't know what the term would be for that.
Right.
There's a possibility that then a political movement in Australia could then secure his release or something like that. My guess would be there's a better chance of that happening in Australia than the U.S. So that was some of my thoughts on this. Will overall, I do think it's a loss for Assange for this to have happened, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I really didn't expect anything different. It really seems like is I guess I don't want to say it is, but it really seems like the goal of the US, Sweden, the UK, and all these Western powers is to make sure that Julian Assange dies without having lived another day as a free man. And that's not only to kill Julian Assange because he's a powerful person, but
Right.
also to kill the fact that he's really started a movement. There's a lot of people who do this and who would be willing to leak and publish classified information because of the work that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and so many other brave whistleblowers have done. Will, I think even me and you find ourselves encouraged and motivated by the sacrifices and the great things that WikiLeaks has done. And
Absolutely.
if documents ever came to my hands, I hope I would be brave enough to do what Assange has done. So, anything else on that before we move on to the other target of Biden's war on journalism, Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, the last thing I'd say, I think that is plausible. That's sort of the Stratfor strategy you laid out of just keeping him behind bars, because that is, I think, what the judge in the UK ordered. That during this whole appeal, Assange will remain in custody, and I don't think they even set a hearing for their next or a date for their next hearing, and so he's just indefinitely still behind bars. So
Yeah.
same kind of situation.
And that just to mention that for a second, one of the real problems there is that anything that Julian Assange would do to try to win the case to his favor, so if they did submit another appeal, that would probably extend the case in the length of time he's behind bars. And
Right.
so, him trying to use maybe the legal avenues that he's justified to. We see this all the time in the U.S. where people will end up signing Alford pleas, even though the DNA evidence shows they didn't, actually commit a murder. Like they know it wasn't you. The evidence proves it, but you're gonna sign a plea saying that you're guilty, but you're really not to
Right.
get out of it. Because if not, you could spend 6 months, a year. People spend years behind bars knowing that they're in. I mean, Kamala Harris kept a man on death row knowing that he was innocent. That's a popular example of this, but it's just a thing to go to. Anyways, Tucker Carlson. Well, the
Yeah.
situation here. The first time I heard this, I was skeptical of what Tucker Carlson was saying. He was saying the NSA was spying on me, and just like want to make sure I would treat the same way as I would if Rachel Maddow was saying that the NSA was spying on her under the Trump administration. I would think it was possible,
Yeah.
absolutely, and in the context that they're spying on all of us, where they have access to all of our communications in a warrantless way. it is true that they are spying on all of us, but in a specific way that I think Americans would feel comfortable with the word as they're actually specifically looking through your emails.
Right.
That's what Tucker Carlson was alleging, and he was brutally mocked for it. And again, I was skeptical because at the time, the evidence he's presenting is somebody came to me, started talking to me about it, and this is what they told me. They were able to read me back my emails, which, I mean, that suggests that somebody has access to Tucker Carlson's emails, but maybe it's like Fox News leaking them. But then it gets interesting. And so, Will, tell us how this gets really interesting.
Sure, yeah. So I think you summarized well just like the first little part of the controversy. Late last month, Carlson claimed that a whistleblower came up to him with, was able to read him the contents of his emails and says that the NSA was spying on him. And yes, Tucker was kind of vague about who this whistleblower is or what position they hold, but he does claim that the government somehow had this information. However, soon after he says this on his show, the NSA, in a very rare move, issued a response, like a formal statement, which is not something they typically do when a journalist just mentions something like this. Which I guess Carlson is a pretty high-profile guy. He's like the biggest cable host in the U.S., but still, it's pretty rare to get the NSA to actually directly respond. Now, they say that Carlson has never been an intelligence target, but the way they worded their statement, it was very careful. Like, you can tell they're using their own weird intelligence terminology. They're not speaking in regular English. Because most people would read like not a target to mean that they never spied on him, that they never collected his emails, they never did any of that, they never snooped on him in any way. However, the NSA here is using terms of art. They're using like their own little terminology. So him not being an intelligence target doesn't preclude what's called incidental collection, which is where they sort of pick up like person one's communications because they're targeting person two. They see both sides of the conversation. And it is kind of looking more and more like that is what happened here, because soon after, like a day or so after the NSA put out that response, Axios reported that Carlson was actually seeking an interview with Vladimir Putin prior to making these claims about the NSA. And they say that the Axios reported that the U.S. government was able to learn of that. They don't say how they became privy of that information. Axios didn't like directly confirm that the NSA scooped that up, but somehow the government became aware of this. And since then, Tucker has come out himself and confirmed that to be true. He said that they were planning to interview Vladimir Putin, just like, many news agencies have. I think NBC or ABC just interviewed him prior to the summit with Biden. So that's not like unheard of. However, Carlson says that he had only told his executive producer about his plans to talk to Putin. So it's not clear how the government would have learned of that other than maybe by snooping on his communications. Now, it is possible, I guess, that Tucker maybe told more people than he's letting on, that he told more than his executive producer, and that maybe that's how it made its way to the feds. But it does
I
seem
also
like
assume, Will, that somebody on the Russian side had to be aware of this, and so, it's, I don't know why, but it's possible that they could have confirmed this to someone too.
right, right. So it's possible they just went out and talked. And then the next thing I was going to say, it seems possible, if not more likely, that they were probably keeping tabs on whatever Russian officials or intermediaries that they had contacted, because obviously you have to go through a few layers of people and officials and spokespeople before you can, land an interview with the president of Russia. And so it seems that maybe they were, keeping tabs on one of those Russians and that they scooped up Carlson incidentally. However, another thing, though, Carlson has claimed that the NSA then leaked his communications to journalists, that they didn't just scoop it up like incidentally and had it sort of behind closed doors. He's saying that they were going to use this Putin interview to try to like smear him as a traitor or a Russian agent or whatever. And honestly, I'm not fully convinced of all that yet. Like, some of this, I think you kind of just have to take Tucker's word for it, and I don't like doing that. The same thing would be true if it were Rachel Maddow. I wouldn't just want to take her word for this stuff. But for the sake of argument, like assuming his story is true in broad strokes, that like a whistleblower really did come forward with his story to him, it would seem that would have to mean that they unmasked Carlson's identity, which, like, under the U.S. law is supposed to be completely hidden from the NSA because he's an American.
Can you explain that process just real and what that means real quick?
Yeah. It's because the NSA, they have a strictly foreign mandate. They're only supposed to be looking at foreign targets. And so if the target they're looking at is foreign and they happen to be communicating with an American citizen, that American's identity is supposed to be masked. Like, I think even from the NSA themselves, I don't think they're even supposed to see that. And then to unmask that, I think they have to go to the FISA court. They have to get some layer of approval to unmask an American's identity. And so it seems like if this whistleblower had this, Carlson's communications and was aware that this is Carlson's emails, then how would he have learned that other than through him being unmasked? Of course, unless otherwise, like, Carlson maybe told other people or the Russians he was talking to told somebody. That stuff is still possible. But it does seem that if this whistleblower really did have communications collected by the NSA, that stuff should have been kept anonymous. But it clearly wasn't. Like, clearly, his name was known. And then even more so, if they were going to leak that stuff to other journalists and say, hey, like, Carlson's a Russian agent or something, then absolutely they'd have to have his identity. So I don't know. The whole thing is kind of weird. I wouldn't say it's totally clear what happened here. Again, some of this is still kind of he say, she say. But it does seem to me likely that the NSA did at least collect some of Carlson's communications incidentally. Like
Right.
it seems like that's sort of more or less proven. And then the last thing I'll say here, I think there's there've been a couple lawmakers who've come out. Kevin McCarthy and Rand Paul, I think, have come out and they're calling for investigations into this. So I guess that some Republican lawmakers are like noticing this and they are, demanding some answers. And so I guess hopefully I don't think anything has actually started in that regard yet, but there is some at least like, demands for a probe.
Right. Yeah, so one of the things, Will, that, I guess I find so disturbing about this is it seems that even like if a small part of Tucker's story is true here, there's an awful leaky problem at the NSA of who's able to unmask American citizens. We also saw this with the Flynn call where there was really, this, is going back to Russiagate. But there was no reason to unmask the American citizen there, and yet they did it anyways, and then leaked that to the press. And this
Right.
is, kind of what the libertarians have warned about since 2013, and understanding what's been going on here, how broad and how massive the NSA's collection process is that even if they say they have all these safeguards, it doesn't mean they actually follow them, and it
Right.
basically gives them ammunition that at least they think they could weaponize against all American citizens. Now, Will, one of the disturbing things about this to me was the reaction, right? Which is
Yeah.
it wasn't that, oh my God, the NSA is maybe spying on Tucker Carlson. And if he's wrong about that, he's wrong about that. But, they're kind of like, oh my God, the NSA was thankfully spying on Tucker Carlson because he was going to interview Vladimir Putin.
Right.
It's just, I don't know, one of the most absurd takes of this whole situation, I think, is that to be what you're getting upset about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even WikiLeaks, like they put out on their Twitter, they mentioned this whole controversy at one point, and like they called Tucker Carlson a journalist, and they were like hounded for that. People were just like blasting them. How dare you say that this evil right winger Tucker Carlson's a journalist, and how dare you like you're crazy running with this crazy conspiracy theory. But like I don't know, I don't think like I certainly don't, I know you don't. I don't think WikiLeaks cares about this kind of partisan nonsense, dude. Like if the NSA can target the biggest cable news host in the country, then what can they do to you or I or Julian Assange or anybody else? So I think that really does kind of say something like, assuming this is true, assuming that, Carlson's story is true, assuming that this reporting is true, that the U.S. was aware of his like contacts with Russians, that should be concerning to everybody, regardless if you fall on the stupid partisan divide.
Right, but that was what matters so much to everyone. Now, Will,
Yeah.
on this, before we move on, I just want to mention that at least the Carlson thing, while divisive, while the coverage has been poor, people are talking about it. The
Yeah.
Julian Assange situation, at least as of 2 days ago, they hadn't mentioned the hacker, the Icelandic hacker Sige. They haven't
Yeah.
mentioned his um, you know, lies and admitting that he lied, the bombshell reporting.
Yeah.
Americans don't know about that. They don't know that the indictment they used against Julian Assange, a journalist, the one they're trying to use to destroy our First Amendment, was
Yeah.
done with at the word of somebody who's been convicted of such crimes against children, who has stolen money from WikiLeaks, and now admits that he lied about everything. I
That's
guess
right.
there just should be a massive thing, and I guess it just seems kind of a coincidence, Will, that the one place this seeps through, not really in print, but at least in the mainstream media in some form, in on TV, is on Tucker Carlson's show, who had on I think Glenn Greenwald and Assange's father and brother. I'm not sure if it's his brother, but I think brother, on to talk
Yeah.
about that case. And so it's just kind of peculiar that it's the journalists who are most willing to challenge the deep state narrative that seem to be the targets of the deep state at this point.
Yeah, that's right. Like Carlson, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be criticized him for.
Yeah.
There's just plenty of stuff, but he's also had a lot of great stuff. He's been willing to. I think he's been one of the few journalists willing to talk about the OPCW stuff. I think he had Aaron Mate on to talk about that. He's had a lot of people on the left to people all over the place. So I
Yeah.
think he really does deserve some. He should be commended for the work he's done.
I remember on the night in January 2020 when Iran was launching missiles at the Al Assad Air Base
Yeah.
and the base in Erbil. Tucker Carlson, almost as it's happening, doesn't have on the Warhogs, Bill Crystal, Matt Spoot. He has on Kelly Valajos, Gil Barndollar, Douglas McGregor to calm the situation down. And you're sitting there and you're like, well, it could be worse than Tucker Carlson. Not that, again, there's so many things that I disagree with him on, and I usually don't watch his show, but he does
Right.
talk about Assange, and he does challenge the war state, even when it's his ally Trump, who is waging the war. So
That's right.
that's one thing you could say about Tucker. Will, anything else before we move into maybe a story that's even more sensational than the Tucker Carlson, this assassination in Haiti, where we now know it was a foreign hit squad that took out the president?
Yeah, no, let's get into that. We'll cover Tucker if there's any more investigations or anything into that. But yeah, you want me to just jump in or you
Yeah,
gotta?
yeah. I mean, you've been covering this all week at RT, so go ahead and start breaking it down. I mean, on the show last week, I broke it down a little bit what we knew at the time that the president had been
Yeah.
assassinated. His wife. Do you have any updates on her? Is she still in critical condition? I heard she was in critical condition in Miami. It sounded like it was not necessarily she was gonna make it situation. And then we had known that a couple people had been arrested. I think four had been killed who were alleged to be involved in the assassination team. So, where are we getting this stuff from? What's going on, Will?
Sure, sure. And just to answer your first question there, yeah, Martine Moise, the wife of the president, who was she was injured, she had to be airlifted to a hospital in Miami. She's apparently doing okay now. I think she put out like a voice message on one of her social medias and said that she's recovering and she's fine.
Oh, good.
Um, yeah, yeah. So there's that. But yeah, you did hit on a lot of like the basic facts that were out on the last episode about the assassination. So I won't spend a ton of time just on like the basics of like the president was shot near his house near the Capitol in Port-au-Prince last Wednesday morning. There's honestly still a lot that's not known here, so like I definitely won't be filling in all the gaps. There's still a lot of investigation that's being done. Some of the people are still at large, so we might have to return to this to give some closure to it. But there is still a lot of mystery surrounding the assassins and their motivations. The people who killed Moise. He apparently had quite a few enemies. A lot of people thought he was holding on to power illegitimately. But the Haitian government now is saying that at least 28 people were behind the assassination. They say 26 of them were Colombians and 2 of them were Haitian-Americans. So people who were born in Haiti but later got American citizenship, I think. And that would be consistent with the very early on, we had reports that the attackers were speaking both English and Spanish. And so a assassination team of Colombians and Haitian-Americans, that would kind of be consistent there. The last I saw, they had arrested 18 of the Colombians and the 2 Americans, and then 3 others were killed in by the police in shootouts. There had actually been some. I think you mentioned this stuff where they had taken hostages. A couple were killed, and I think there are 5 more. The last I'd seen, 5 more are still on the run. I think those are all Colombians. And now Colombian officials have also backed up the idea that some of their citizens were involved. The defense minister and the national police chief have both come out and said that it looks like at least some of the gunmen were former Colombian soldiers. And that I think now the Colombian government is now saying they were all hired through a couple different private security contractors and flown into Haiti. Some of them had spent a good amount of time in the Dominican Republic next door in like the weeks leading up to the assassination. I'm not sure I don't think they've accounted for all of their whereabouts quite yet, but a good number of them were in the Dominican Republic. They were posting pictures on their social media like tourists. You can see the Washington Post actually just had like a decent like timeline they did where they were going through like all the pictures, all the stuff we know, all their social media posts and all that. People can check that out. And very interestingly, a woman claiming to be the wife of one of these Colombian assassins has come forward, and she claims that he was hired and working for a security firm called CTU. And this soldier, his name is Francisco Uribe. And apparently this guy was already under investigation for extrajudicial killings like a decade ago while he was in the Colombian military. So this guy had already sort of been like, he already had some legal trouble. And then there's another woman too saying her brother was one of these Colombians who was killed in a firefight with the Haitian police. And she also shared a photo of him wearing a CTU shirt, the same security firm. And there
Huh.
is a firm based in Florida by that name, and it's run by a Venezuelan guy named Antonio Intragio. And an AP reporter named Joshua Goodman actually did a lot of great work on this. He had a good Twitter thread up on this that people might check out, um, where he's going through. He visited like the offices of this security firm. There's not much. It seems like kind of a fly-by-night operation. There's like an empty warehouse and like one small office building where the guy comes and visits once a week. But it's all kind of weird, the connections through these various security firms. But one of them is apparently based in Florida and run by this Venezuelan guy. Now, when it comes to the two Haitian-Americans, a decent amount of information has also come out about them. They've been identified as James Solegs and Joseph Vincent, and I may be pronouncing the first guy's names wrong. But Solegs reportedly used to work as a guard at the Canadian embassy in Haiti, and he also apparently the AP also dug this up. He had worked on a security detail for a company run by Sean Penn, the actor, the Hollywood actor, because he was apparently involved in like relief efforts after an earthquake in Haiti in 2010, and his team needed security. And so one of these Haitian Americans on this hit squad apparently worked for him. And now, according to a Haitian judge who had heard these guys' testimony, the two Haitian Americans, they claimed they were just working as translators for this group of assassins. And they also claimed they thought that the plan was just to arrest Moise and bring him back to the presidential palace. Apparently, they thought that this was all being done on like a legal court order, because there is some dispute as to who should be in charge in Haiti right now. Some people say that Moise should have left his term long ago, I think in earlier this year. So that's their claim, that these two Americans say that they just thought they were kidnapping him. And it's kind of interesting because that part very much reminds me of, people might recall, we covered this in detail, those American mercenaries in Venezuela, Silvercorp USA. That's exactly what they said they were doing, that they were going to kidnap President Nicolas Maduro and then go seize the presidential palace and have him flown out of there or something. Like, I don't really know what to make of that. It's just kind of a weird coincidence and similarity in these two like
And
random
the
mercenary
team was
stories.
about the same size too, right? It was like 20 to 30 people. It wasn't very many. In kind of a similar fashion. Will,
Yeah.
I had a couple questions, things we didn't know when I covered this last, and we probably still don't, but I was just wondering if you had any clarity. So when this initially happened, reports were that whoever spoke English in the group gained access by identifying themselves as DEA, and the U.S. had, denied, the State Department denied any involvement. Does it seem like it was just a scam? Do we have any idea if the DEA was potentially involved?
Yeah, see, this is something I was very curious about too, because another weird detail in all of this is the fact that none of Moise's own bodyguards were wounded at all. Like, if you'd expect, like, if this heavily armed commando squad rolls up to his house to kill him, they're not, like, talking to the guards. They're just killing them immediately, you'd think. However, that's how this whole DEA thing might tie in, because apparently one of the English-speaking guys, one of the two Haitian Americans, had called out and said, hey, identified them as DEA agents. And so I've seen some people sort of making the connection that maybe that's why the guards stood down, is because they thought it was some kind of DEA raid. Although, I don't know, that's all kind of weird. Like, why would the DEA at 1 in the morning on a random Wednesday just be showing up at the president's house? So, like, I don't know, like the bodyguards might have been more skeptical about that. Because some people were saying that the lack of injuries among his bodyguards seems to suggest some kind of inside job, that they like let them in or something. But then others are saying, well, no, they identified themselves as DEA, and so maybe that's how they made entry without killing them. But as far as I know, the Americans say they absolutely insist there was no involvement from the DEA, and I think even the Haitian government says that too. That like this was a ruse to try to, I guess, like disarm the guards.
Yeah. I assume that was the case, but it's always good to follow up because a lot of what's going on in Haiti right now, the street violence is around street gangs and drug activity and stuff like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if the DEA has a big footprint in Haiti. Another
Sure.
question I had, Will, that I wasn't sure about is the Colombians that are being identified. Do you know if these are like former militants that we're talking about, like FARC militants, left-wing militants? Are these former government soldiers, maybe special forces from Colombia? Or I know they have right-wing militants there too. I'm just curious because some people seem to like try to tie it to Venezuela and Maduro by suggesting that these are like left-wing FARC type actors.
Yeah, see, I've seen nothing to suggest that they were some kind of FARC or ELN militants or anything. The Colombian government is saying that some of these guys are former soldiers, that they're veterans of the Colombian military. But it sounded more like these guys had gone on to work for private security firms And I think the Colombians are even alleging that like 4 different security firms were involved. It wasn't just this one in the Dominican Republic or that had flown these Colombians out to the Dominican Republic. Apparently, it was like a fairly big operation involving several companies, but it sounded more to me like it was just a financial kind of motivation and not like a ideological kind of thing, like that would be linked to FARC.
Right. So, well, I mean, are there any other like big outstanding questions that you have? Obviously, I think the biggest still question mark to me is how the actual assassination happened and how exactly the presidential guard didn't take more casualties. Because I don't know, it seems like either they weren't very loyal, even if everybody got the drop on them. You think somebody would have like pressed the button or yelled or sacrificed themselves. Kind of,
Yeah.
you know, that's what they're trained to do, and you know, either they didn't care too much about the president. It could be that, you know, maybe like loyalty was waning or something at that time. But
Right.
it's an awfully strange thing that you know, a president of a country would be able to be kidnapped by. I mean, maybe not a red tag group, but this wasn't like the people with the equipment and the means and the training of, you know, top tier U.S. special forces or something like that.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, like there is a question to me. The biggest outstanding question is just sort of who did this and what is their motivation. Like on one hand, it's sort of like that is a burning question. On the other hand, it's almost like obvious because like this Moise guy had so many enemies and so many so much political opposition. It seems almost like unsurprising that something like this might happen in Haiti. But nonetheless, it is still like those details are still we still have to fill in the gaps there. It's unclear who actually like did this, who spearheaded this operation. If we're talking about several different security firms involved, like it seems like there has to be a decent amount of coordination. Like you had mentioned, maybe some potential people are claiming some kind of Venezuelan tie. There was this, like the guy who owns one of the security firms allegedly involved is a Venezuelan national, but who knows? Maybe he's a defector from the Maduro regime or something. Who knows what his ties are? Because
Yeah.
yeah, as far as I know, this Moise guy was a pretty good friend to the U.S. government. I don't think there was any like, I don't know of any desire to sort of oust him from power from that
In
faction.
fact, we had covered this. I had covered this on the last show. State Department spokesperson, I think that's Ned Price, said that the U.S. supported him continuing his term to February 7th,
Right.
2022. So that would support his Edster claim to power. Now, Will, one of the things I want to point out that I learned from Dub Bandow, he has a great article out today at antiwar.com on this. Bandow points out that there's actually only like 10 of 30 sitting legislators right now in Haiti because they didn't hold elections. And so while the president got to conveniently extend his term without an election mandate, apparently the legislature dissolved. And so he's been essentially ruling by decree. There's been street protest, and I think the security situation there seems pretty bad. It seems like gangs run a lot, especially in the cities. And
Yeah.
if you're a citizen of Haiti, you probably don't feel very safe. And so, you know, there, as you point out, there's a lot of reasons to for multiple actors. I'm sure, you know, even U.S. interests, the gangs, maybe, if they have that much power, well, maybe they got together and organized this, or a political rival, any number of possibilities. But no matter what the you know actual situation is, you know, the big thing that I was worried about, and I'm sure you were too right away, is you're like, well, this is a Caribbean country, and so if there's instability, what does Washington do when it sees instability? Well, it deploys troops. And the bad news is the person who has claimed to be the leader of Haiti, which I think there's some actual dispute over who that should be.
Yes.
This is like an actual like kind of complicated dispute, right? Where the prime minister was an interim role, and the president had appointed a new prime minister, but the new prime
Yes.
minister I don't think was really able to get authorization because there's not a sitting legislator. So it's a mess.
Yes.
I don't know how to untangle that constitutional knot, and it doesn't seem that there's a very clear outline in Haiti for what's to happen. But let's talk about what the U.S. role is going to be here, because it looks like we're preparing to intervene at least in a small way, if not more.
Yeah, yeah. So on Thursday or Friday, the Haitian government actually did request a U.S. troop deployment, which is kind of odd. Like usually you don't see a Caribbean nation demanding the U.S. to come occupy it, but I guess they wanted some kind of force to come in and keep peace in case of any like major unrest. or to prevent attacks on officials or infrastructure, key infrastructure. There's been a lot of unrest in Haiti before. They've been hit by a lot of natural disasters. Their political system is usually pretty like unstable and full of a lot of corruption and graft. And as you kind of hit on, right now there is a group of lawmakers right now claiming that the guy who's currently serving as both the interim president and the prime minister, Claude Joseph, they're saying he's not legitimate. He's not the legitimate leader. They actually nominated two other guys to fill those positions, and one of them is the guy that Moise had actually tapped before his death, Ariel Henry, I think it is. And then the other guy they want as president, I think, is Joseph Lambert. So there is sort of like we're already seeing some dispute over the rightful ruler of Haiti. And I'm not really sure how much influence or popular support this group of politicians has, but it does seem like possibly that could spiral into something more serious if you have different groups claiming legitimate authority. Now, fortunately, the U.S. has said it will not be sending soldiers. Within a few hours of the request being made public, the White House said that won't be happening. However, they have now sent agents from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security apparently to advise and assist their investigation. And I think they also said they sent some kind of like special rapid response team from the State Department and the DOJ and the National Security Council for a similar purpose to kind of advise. Now, I think the White House's wording was that we have no plans to send in troops at this time. And so that's sort of like a qualifier that could mean nothing. It could just be that, no, this is a denial. They're not sending troops. But that could give them enough room to later do that if they decide. But right now, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen, a U.S. troop deployment. Now, the Haitians have also apparently asked the UN to send peacekeepers, which I haven't actually seen if the UN has responded to that. I think the Security Council would have to vote to make that happen. But they want some kind of foreign force to come in and secure things, I guess, because the Haitian government right now is very afraid of unrest and possibly even a coup.
Yeah, so I guess is there any idea of how the Haitian people feel about this at all? Have you seen any good reporting on that? That's one of the issues I have here. Is it really seems confusing to me as to what the possible interests of everybody involved are. Obviously, I guess this Joseph Claude, the current ruler, or Claude Joseph, would
Yeah.
probably be incentivized for the troops because if they come on his mandate, he assumes that they will uphold his rule of power, and
Right.
so that seems understanding to me. But have there like been protests in Haiti against this, or I don't know? There's probably no reporting in the U.S. on what the people of Haiti want, or there's no real journalists that care or anything like that. But I was just wondering if you had any idea on that.
Now, I have seen reports that like swarms of Haitians are going to the U.S. embassy over there and asking like for aid and assistance and stuff. I'm not totally sure about like what the attitude is toward the situation right now. I'm not sure what Claude's like popular support is. I know again that Moise had a lot of opposition, but I'm not totally sure like what proportion of the population would have been happy to see him go. I'm honestly not totally sure about like the popular feelings of Haitians right now, to be honest.
Yeah, I kind of have the same perspective on that, and it's very interesting. Well, where in this case we have like a rather sensational story going on in a country that's very close to the U.S., and there doesn't seem to be like a great desire to get to the bottom of what happened here or to find out what's going on. Not that there's no coverage of it or anything like that, but very little investigative type reporting. More just everybody at this point seems to be repeating what officials in Haiti are putting out.
Yeah, yeah. I would say the one good exception to that so far that I've seen has been the Associated Press. They've actually seemed to have done a good amount of digging into these like private mercenary companies and what actually happened with Moise in a way that seemed like very high level. That like I don't know, like I'm sure the Haitian authorities might be interested in that stuff too.
Right. So, anything else on this story, Will, that we should point out? Any like upcoming dates that we should keep our eye on, or is it just going to kind of be as the news comes out, and Haiti's in a real state of chaos and floods at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly watch for updates on this. I think some of the mercenaries, the alleged assassins, are still on the run. And now, one concern that I've seen people airing is that some of these people in custody, some of these Colombians, might conveniently die. Like if there was some kind of inside element into this whole plot, that maybe these very vital witnesses to what actually happened there might not live to tell the tale. And so I don't know. That's totally speculative, but that is one thing I would encourage people to watch out for is some of these witnesses disappearing.
Or certainly their testimony being influenced or changed or something like that.
Right, right.
Torture could be used or bribery or something.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think that's what we have on Haiti. Should we wrap up here with Arab Prince? Will?
Yeah, yeah. So this next one we have is kind of a crazy story. Something that's apparently been happening behind the scenes for quite a while now that I was, none the wiser of. According to this piece published in Time magazine last week, Eric Prince, the mercenary contractor guy who's infamous from running Blackwater, had some huge ambitions in Ukraine, where he wanted to build up like a mercenary force using veterans from the Donbass War. He wanted to set up this big like security consortium worth $10 billion, I think. And this Time story is very long and detailed, but please tell us like what were his plans for Ukraine?
Yeah, so this story starts in I guess February 23rd, 2020, when Arab Prince got a meeting with a top advisor to Ukraine's President Zelensky, and I guess this occurred in a seedy part of Kiev at the Vodka Grill. What a name for a bar in Kiev. And there, I guess Prince made some big promises, and it was that he was going to create a $10 billion defense and aviation industry for Ukraine. And so basically, this is a three-part plan, with part one being he was going to essentially, I guess, weaponize some of the veterans of Ukraine's civil war. It's not exactly clear who he's looking at, Will, but we know that there's a lot of elements and veterans of the Ukrainian civil war, on the Kiev side of this war, which I'm sure they're coming from,
Right.
where they're neo Nazis, they're loyalists of Stefan Bandera, they're part of the Azov Battalion or other groups in Ukraine, and so that's why at the beginning I made the joke about him becoming Grand Wizard of this army,
Right.
since it's a private force. So that in a sense was, I think the most disturbing part of the plan, Will, is because Arab Prince, formerly the head of the organization known as Blackwater, I think it's now Academy, right? It could have changed again.
Yeah, they've
But
gone through a couple name
yeah.
changes, I think.
Anyways, when he had Blackwater, of course, they shot up and killed, I think, 17 Iraqi civilians at one point. Trump pardoned some of those guys. Anyways, this is, Arab Prince teaming up with neo Nazis. I'm sure they would be, willing and able to carry out a lot of war crimes, should this plan have come to fruition. So, this, one of the things I guess too was that Prince was going to be, it seems, in control of this mercenary force, and it seemed exactly unclear of what he wanted to do with the mercenary force, because a part of this plan, Will, has to do with actually bringing an end to the Ukrainian civil war. Now, I guess from what I know about the Ukrainian civil war, this plan seems really half baked. But the idea is that along with taking these mercenaries, part two of the plan was going to call for buying a Ukrainian engine factory, I guess a jet engine factory,
Yeah.
that was recently sold to some Chinese interest. And this acquisition was going to cost $1 billion, but then they were going to leverage this with Russia and offer Russia to buy these engines in exchange for ending the civil war. Now, in the article, it doesn't really make it clear what was going to happen. It kind of says that the U.S. will relieve sanctions, Ukraine will sell the jet engines, and then they'll work out a deal on the Donbass and Crimea. I don't know, what they actually meant by that. Maybe it was a path to working, but it's, at least the way Time wrote it, it would be Russia giving back Crimea, which seems quite unlikely
Mm,
at this point.
yeah.
Anyways, at the time, of course, Eric Prince is the brother of Betsy DeVos, who was Trump's education secretary up until the final days of his administration. And so I guess I'm not exactly sure of how serious Ukraine was considering this proposal, because at least one Ukrainian source pointed out, and it does seem to be confirmed that this was a part of the discussion, was what Ukraine was really interested in was a meeting with somebody in the Trump administration, particularly Jared Kushner. And so I'm
Mm,
not sure if they were maybe entertaining this meeting with Prince, knowing that his sister was Secretary of Education, and then thinking that he probably knows some people in the Trump administration, and that was, their way in. So I'm not sure if the Ukrainians ever considered that, they would actually take up this deal. But then they now say from Ukrainian sources that it's very unlikely that Prince would get this deal, as Trump is no longer in office, and so he's not as viable or valuable of a person to do business with. Seems to be the case. Now there is this issue of this Ukrainian engine company. It's called Motor. I
Motor
think
Stitch.
Motor Sitch, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And Motor Sitch was recently sold to some Chinese interests for, I think, about $700+ million. And
Yeah.
my understanding, Will, is that there was some questions about if that deal was done appropriately through Ukrainian law. I know there's rampant corruption in Ukraine, so it seems possible to me that this was maybe the kind of deal that got done where a formerly, I think, kind of public company is now in the hands of Chinese investors. Like, who knows who's getting the kickbacks there? And there could have been a lot of corruption. There could be reasons to cancel this deal. But essentially, the Prince plan called on Ukraine to just outright cancel this deal and then to sell this company, I guess, to Prince through Windward Capital. And I tried to do some research, Will, into what Windward Capital was, because this was going to be a $1 billion acquisition. And it was very hard to get any information on it. But it seemed that the owner of that firm, it's an LLC, was a man by the name of Frank Stabler, and it's very hard to get any information on him other than he formerly worked for Enron. It doesn't seem that he was like one of the bigwigs. He's only like mentioned in the references of the congressional report on the Enron collapse, but nonetheless, he does seem to like have been at Enron during that time, and so it's very interesting how this guy. It's almost impossible to find a picture of him online. His wife is named on the board, Mary Ann, on several of his LLCs. But then if you look her up, it's very hard to get any information. There's were 2 or 3 other people on the board of his LLCs. Unfortunately, they all had common names, and it's just impossible to tell who actually it is because. Well, it seems that Mr. Stabler is based in Texas, and that's just my guess by where it's listed on his LinkedIn and where the office is listed on the LinkedIn. When you actually go through and look at his LLCs, they're incorporated in several different states, including Texas and Louisiana. So, I'm not sure who these people are, where they live, but Eric Prince at least thought they were going to be able to come up with $1 billion to buy this company. So that's another interesting part of all of this. The last part that got some attention and I think was pumped up way too much in this Time article, and they tried to russiagate it a little bit, and they said 2 of the people that were working with Prince were people who were friendly towards Russia, and one was called that because he suggested the U.S. lifting sanctions on Russia in order to end the Ukrainian civil war. So that's just Time propaganda calling that guy a Russian asset. But the other guy is somebody who was sanctioned by the U.S. and was somebody who did business with Rudy Giuliani and has been alleged to like be a a Russian asset, Russian intelligence asset working in Ukraine, although it's just allegations from the U.S. I don't see any evidence of that. So, Will, I think that's about the main interesting pieces I have here. I guess from the Ukrainian side, they didn't say this is definitely off the table, but sources from the Ukrainian administration did signal that Prince was unlikely to get this, or certainly not this whole deal.
Well, man, thank you for that was a lot of stuff that you put together there, and all the digging you did into the board of directors and all that. That was great. The one thing about the Motor Sitch bit was very interesting to me as well, because I actually wrote about that deal last year, I think, or even I forget exactly. It might have been 2019. But when under Trump, when John Bolton was trying to go over there and pressure them to stop that sale of the Chinese company. And I was curious too that like maybe of some like did you see any other signs of U.S. involvement? I mean, yes, Eric Prince was sort of the brother of the education secretary, But this thing on this Motor Sitch deal seemed to be exactly what the Trump administration wanted at the time. So was that just like, do you think that was maybe just like a behind the, informal deal or something? Or did you see any other formal U.S. government involvement in this?
I kind of got the opposite impression because when Prince, I guess if you're in Eric's Prince's position, maybe when the Ukrainians come at you and ask for a meeting with Jared Kushner, you kind of get the idea that they're not very interested in you and you feel insulted or something like that. But at the same time, if you're really trying to get this done, I would think that it would be in your interest to maybe flex your political connections and to be like, hell yeah, I got let me hit up Kushner right now. Me and the Kush baby were hanging out having beers last night. We're gonna I'll get you a meeting with him. I could probably get you a meeting with Don too, no problem. And
Yeah.
that like kind of that being the route that that Prince would take. But rather, he pretty much said that like he had no ability to get them that meeting, and just recommended them like some lobbying firm that they could pay to try to get a meeting. And so I almost had the opposite idea that this maybe wasn't necessarily backed by the administration. And the other thing that makes me think that will is this isn't new that Eric Prince will pull things like this. Now it's worth covering because he's certainly somebody who could get it done and
Right.
who has set up entities around the world, trained special forces, CIA hit squads. He set up something to combat pirates in Somalia, apparently, stuff in Libya. Like, he does carry out these operations all over the world, but, some of them like this seem a little bit more far fetched, like what happened with Afghanistan, where he wanted to privatize at least the Afghan Air Force, if not the entire military there, and like have a private warplane air force and everything like that. And so he seems to at least shoot for the stars, if not just outright kind of be kooky and think he could pull about anything off.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I was thinking maybe this deal with like the Motor Sitch thing, because Eric Prince was wanting to do the thing that the Trump administration wanted to happen. They didn't want it to be a Chinese company running that anymore. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he was acting on their orders or behest. Maybe he just wanted to do that to like make sure the U.S. wouldn't mess with him in his plans there. They're like, hey, look, you guys got something out of this deal too. So
Right.
I don't know. There's many considerations there.
Or maybe he thought it would sweeten the pot, but the Trump administration, by the this time in 2020, I'm sure Trump Motor Sitch is completely off the what's going on with my car. We got
Right.
some car troubles, dang. That that doesn't really know what's going on with that or something. But maybe had Trump gotten elected, this would have been something to look at. Although I
Yeah.
don't know if, like, how out of power the Prince family is now, or Arab Prince. He certainly has a lot of connections in the Middle East and around the world. And, Betsy DeVos did resign in protest at the end of the Trump administration. So maybe she
Right.
bought herself some favorability with the in crowd in D.C. for the Biden administration.
Right.
Anyways, Will, a great show. Great to talk to you again. Uh, People could find the show at Facebook and MeWe. It's just conflicts of interest. On Twitter, we're at con_interest. Donate to the show, Patreon and Subscribestar. Me and Will put in a lot of work here. This is what we do for a living. So if you could support us, we really appreciate it. We put money into making the show bigger and better, and making sure we pay the bills ourselves and stuff. So any support you could give us is always very helpful. And let's see, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle. You're at the Will Porter on Twitter. I'm at Kyle
Correct.
Anzalone _. And buy your CBD at Paloma Verde.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.